Returning now to one of those top stories, Vladimir Putin's regime is defying new laws enacted to evict the Russian Federation from a Canberra site close to Parliament House. Joining me now live is Nationals MP Keith Pitt. Keith, this is a very interesting situation here. There's now a Russian squatter at that site. What do you make of this situation?
Well, firstly, this is Australia. It's not the Ukraine. You can't just occupy territory and then claim it. We have laws in this country which we expect everyone to abide by. The Coalition worked very closely with the Labor government to pass legislation that was necessary as swiftly as it was required. And we need Russia to actually obey what is in that legislation. And they shouldn't be doing this. I think that's the bottom line.
Does it represent a breakdown of civilised diplomatic relations?
Oh, these are very complicated matters and they'll need to be considered carefully. I'm sure the government and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade are looking at it very closely. And obviously the Coalition will support what action is required in consultation with the government. But I mean, this is just wild. It's almost unheard of. So I think action will be taken swiftly. I expect that the Russian diplomats and the Russian diplomatic service should abide by Australia's laws and the directions of Australia's government. But it is complex and it will take a little bit of time.
Look, it's an interesting situation and we're going to be looking at that one closely later on in the show. Let's move on now to The Voice. Anthony Albanese has rejected Peter Dutton's offer to delay or change the referendum. Is that a sensible move in your view to at least delay it?
Well, Prime Minister Albanese is going to make the decisions that he makes. But the discussion on The Voice doesn't help anyone with interest rates. It doesn't help anyone that can't pay their rent. It doesn't help anyone that's been affected by high inflation. It doesn't help anyone that's working extra jobs just to try and keep their heads above water. And the questions that the Coalition asked this week were pretty straightforward and fundamental. The idea that the Labor government will go from now until a referendum in October without answering basic questions about how this might work, who it impacts, who is involved, how much will it cost, how is it established, I just don't think that will fly. And I think the Australian people can see through it. The things they don't know worries them, and I think they'll make a decision towards the no case.
Well, Linda Burney faced a lot of questions from the Coalition about The Voice's remit during Parliament this week, and the Prime Minister says that he wants to place legal limits on the scope of it. Does that give you some confidence that it would not seek to change, for example, the date of Australia Day?
Well, the proposed change to the referendum itself says everything is subject to the Constitution. This is one of the major concerns. We've seen advice from leading lawyers that would have to be established through the courts. It could take 10 years as to what all these things mean. And why wouldn't you just do this beforehand? Wouldn't you establish the legislation and the framework and how it might work before you went to the people with a change to the Constitution? It's not like it's minor. It is Australia's Constitution, our founding document. And the Australian people aren't mugs. They want to know the detail before they make the decision.
What sort of scope then would the Coalition be happy with?
Well, it doesn't matter what the speculation may or may not be. We have a proposition before us. This is what the debate is. It's not about what it could or couldn't be or should have been or might be in the future. It's what it is right now. And the proposal is on the table. The legislation has passed. The changes that are being proposed are now being debated and will be put to the Australian people. This is the debate that matters. I want people to be informed so they can make an informed decision, but I'm very worried about how divisive it will be leading into October, and that's why Peter Dutton has called for change, and I think he was right to do that.
All right, let's move on. I want to ask you about the RBA Governor. Jim Chalmers says he will announce a decision in July as to who will hold that position into the future. Is it time for a new face?
I think the RBA Governor's position is a pretty thankless task. I mean, everyone wants individuals to have more empathy, and the reality is they make decisions based on numbers, based on the state of the economy, and if they don't get inflation under control, everyone has to pay. What we've seen from the Labor government is proposed changes that, they'll have a new committee with members of the ACTU on it because apparently they've got more economic credentials, which I think is very, very strange. So I think Mr Lowe, he's got a difficult job. He makes a decision based on the information that's in front of him. Sure, I'd like him to be a bit more cautious and be a bit more empathetic towards the Australian people who are doing it tough, but his job is to get inflation back within the margins and inside the target range. And it's the only tool that they have. Will there be change? Well, that's up to the Treasurer, but we'll soon know.
Has he done a good job, do you think, Philip Lowe?
Oh, look, I think some of his commentary, particularly during COVID, about interest rates not changing for a long period of time, that's certainly not something that I thought that he should have said. I think he's regretted that and he's made statements himself. Things move, they move quickly. But in Australia right now, inflation is close to 8%. It's 7%, I'm sorry. It's a very tough time. We've seen a massive increase in people having to work more hours because they can't pay their bills. The Australian people are really struggling. We see more stories about homelessness, about people living in tents and caravans and down the side of the river, particularly in my own patch. And yet all of the tools that are available for the government to lean into on this, they don't seem to want to use. So I think they should get away from the ideology arguments. The Voice is obviously their priority. For the Australian people, their priority is keeping their head above water, and right now they're struggling to do that.
Keith Pitt, we've got to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us.